Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Season 4, Episode 1, Princess Twilight Sparkle, in which the episode where Twilight, who is now an alicorn, is like, I will make this work, fails miserably. Celestia and Luna get kidnapped by an unknown force, and horrible, unusual vines start attacking the earth, sky, and magic of Equestria. And then, at the end, we have a dumb ending. Oh, and Discord makes basically a cameo in the middle of it. Yeah, something like that. The episode starts off with Twilight having issue flying, and I have to admit, I kind of wish they did more with that, you know? That'd be cool. I just realized I'm going to have to start getting new names here, because this is a Megan McCarthy episode. Where's Megan McCarthy? Who's written a lot of very good episodes, so that's nice. I have to admit I'm of two minds on this episode. Yeah, exactly. Have her do some training sessions and trying to get used to it. By memory, we'll see, but by memory, her problems with flying basically go away after Part 2 and are never brought up again. We'll see. But moving on. Yeah, you gotta have a montage. Each little cut, you show a little improvement. To show it all will take too long, you gotta have a montage. So, yeah, she also flew fine at the end of the last episode, too. Just to make sure this is clear, and I did verify this, yes, this really is part 2 of 3, since this is effectively a 3-parter. You can see how it was kind of restructured. You know, the disaster in Equestria was being restructured into the disaster that that the vines are. So, you know, duh, kind of a thing there. So, I'm going to start off by mentioning something. Now, this is pure analysis / theory crafting. I don't have any evidence to this. But I think this is the soft reboot of the series, right here. Now, I want to talk about this in two perspectives. Because first, if you were to start... That's true, Shikor. He did say he didn't do it. Always fade out. If this was the first episode of MLP you ever saw, you'd probably be up to speed on things, relatively speaking. You'd miss some of the details and nuances, obviously, and you wouldn't know who everyone is yet, but you could probably start the show right here. Which kind of is part of the reason I mentioned that. This is to use two... Yeah, they're also changing networks at this point in time. That's important to note. But this reminds me of two other episodes. One of Star Trek Next Generation and one of Deep Space Nine. I actually commented on both of these when we were going through them on the Ruminations. In TNG, it was Evolution, which is the beginning... You're probably thinking, what episode is Evolution? Evolution was the episode in which Wesley accidentally lets loose the nanomachines on the ship when they're trying to examine this star. And there's this guest star, who I can't think of the actor, forgive me, but he's playing an astrophysicist who's studying the star. And it's not that memorable of an episode. But if you remember that episode, and I talked about this during the rumination, it was a substantial change in just about every way behind the scenes. New set designer, new lighting director, new directing staff in general, new writing staff, changeovers in who was actually in charge of being the showrunner, because most of the old showrunners have been canned by this point. Gene Roddenberry himself was no longer involved. They had a higher budget because the show was doing well, etc., etc., etc. Evolution was the beginning of what most people think of TNG, and for good reason. It's because it was basically a soft reboot of the show, and Way of the Warrior was the exact same thing over at Deep Space Nine. Complete overhaul of almost everything behind the scenes, and that's when I actually don't think that's the exact moment, but that's basically when I can't think of his name. Blue beard guy, effectively became the new showrunner for Deep Space Nine. I can't think of his name, and started really pushing the long-term story arcs that would be a hallmark of DS9 from that point onwards. Point being, I feel this is the same thing. This is the moment at which they're like, okay. You'll notice they even actually... This isn't actually established in this episode, but in the next episode, we actually establish a story arc. Ira Stephen Bear, thank you. We actually established a story arc that's going to go across most of the seasons next episode, which was a new thing at the time. They'd had kind of formats. I talked about this before. Season 1 of MLP was, adventures, right? Just kids running around. Season 2 was about, or was it Season 3? No, I think it was because Season 1 was the ended with Dear Princess Celestia. I'm pretty sure, it was Season 2. I'm right. Season 2 was when everyone else started writing letters to Princess Celestia. Season 3 was the conclusion season. Everything was trying to wrap up threads. But now we actually have a definitive story arc, and that's going to be the chest and the tree, which we'll cover next episode. So, that's kind of nice. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But the other thing I wanted to mention with regards to the whole soft reboot thing is, in addition to the fact that you could start the show with this episode, and, this could be a good launching point, you'll notice this episode does a lot to reference the first episode. Summer Sun Festival, and... I mean, she was right, SA2K. The Summer Sun Festival, the return of Nightmare Moon is here. The friends, both being friends and getting together, and oh gosh, or we should be together. Discord is brought in, and he's going to be a relatively major side character, or guest character, basically from now until the end of the show, etc., etc. Consequently, we have several things to add to the counter. I don't want to get these out of the way really quickly here. First and most obvious, this does qualify as a books knocked off the shelf. We haven't had one of those in a while. And we have a lot of continuity elements in this episode. We have Pinky Promise, which is showcased on camera. We have Winter Wrap-Up, which is referenced by Discord. We have the reference to the first episode, which I just mentioned. And we've got one other one, which is actually probably my favorite bit of continuity in the whole episode. Twitchy Tail. In case you missed it, there's a bit... And they don't even call it out. They don't even say anything. Just what happens is they're standing in Twilight's library talking. Pinky's tail starts twitching, and she immediately dodges, and then a thing comes out and smashes where she just was. So Pinky's sense is just kind of a nice little thing thrown in. Nice little tidbit. I love little tidbits of continuity like that. Anyways. So, looking at my notes here. Yeah, it was a nice callback. There's a lot of good nice callbacks in this and the next one. Interesting to note, when they show off Twilight's stained glass window of her becoming princess, it is directly opposite the window for Discord. You can see several other windows there, but the window directly opposing it is the Discord one. I thought that was kind of cute. Anyways, so there's this nice little bit where Twilight really wants to spend the day with her friends because this is an important day to her. It's basically a holiday for her of the day that she met her friends. Which, yeah, I'm completely down with that. I kind of do that sort of thing too. An anniversary, if you will. Friendiversary? Paliversary? Anyways. Either way, she wants to spend it with her friends, which makes perfect sense. What I find funny is Applejack then says, don't worry. Despite everything, the one thing that will always keep us together is the elements of harmony. Now, first of all, this is actually really blatant, blunt foreshadowing. God, I hope not, SA2K. Let's just pretend it isn't and move on. Because I think that's dumb. I do. I'm not going to lie. I think that's dumb. I know that officially, canonically speaking, the whole show takes course of the course of like 2 years or whatever, which is dumb. Applejack mentions the elements of harmony are what keeps them together. When I first saw this, you know what my first reaction to what that was? No, they're not. Like, you guys are together because you've grown as friends over the last 4 years. 3 years, excuse me. And because you represent the elements. The elements themselves don't actually keep you together, right? I mean, come on. That's not how that works, right? What's funny is, beginning this, I felt like they were going into a... I don't know what to call it. It's the story arc when... I mean, you get older and you start to distance and move away from your friends you had as a childhood. From, like, high school or whatever, right? You probably know that arc, or indeed, maybe you even know that in real life. It's that whole idea of distancing as we all just kind of go on with our own lives thing. Which is funny, because in my experience in real life, that's a load of hogwash. The only reason that happens is if you don't actually want to stay friends with people. Yes, exactly, Act. That's the exact same rule I do use with other television. No, seriously, if you actually look at it, so for example, Star Trek TNG, to use a direct example, is 7 seasons and occurs over 7 years in game, or in universe, rather, in lore. But yeah, exactly. This arc will pop up later. This is not that arc, to be clear. I just thought that was the direction they were going in when I first saw it. That being said, I have to admit the episode got a grin out of me when the train started going off. And they're like, bye, bye. I feel like I'm missing something. Letter for the princess. Dear princess, no, you're not missing anything. Sincerely, Pinky. That's me. That got a grin out of me. That was a nice little gag. So, Twilight starts to panic, like you do. In fact, she panics in an almost identical manner as to previously. I have 2 things to say about this, though. First, I'll talk more about this in the future, but I feel like this is a little bit of regression rather than anything else. Because she's, like, as we mentioned back in Season 3, Season 3 was supposed to be the end of panicky Twilight Sparkle, and then they just kind of decided to reverse that. If it actually gets, jarring, if it actually gets to the point where it's, aggravating, I'm going to go ahead and put that as a continuity counter, because this is a little weird. However, the other thing I have to mention is it's amusing that now she's panicking in full 3 dimensions, because she has wings now. Bonk! That also amused me a little bit. Yeah, I know, Raskor. I mean, it's not like they couldn't start a new character arc for her. That's absolute insanity. Anyways, so, now it's time. No need to apologize. Sorry. It's okay. Sorry. Yeah, that's me, by the way. Several of my friends have joked several times that I'm secretly Canadian. So, Celestia walks off and then gets captured by the strange black and teal vine. Da-da-da-da. There's no book about princess etiquette, that's true. And then there's another visual gag, or actually it's an audio gag that I have to mention really amused me. There's this bit where Spike is sleeping. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. I like to think that on multiple occasions Spike has fallen asleep going down the checklist with Twilight, and Twilight just hasn't noticed. I can picture that. Check, 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 check. But yeah, so Celestia, okay, let's comment on the years thing, even though I don't want to. Let me just say, first of all, that I dislike the idea that 5 years of television is actually 2 years. Let's just start with that. But ignoring that, they never at any point mentioned that this is the second Summer Sun Festival. That's not a thing that's ever brought up. This is just another one. This is her first one as princess. That's the reason why this is so significant and why this is substantial to her. So it could easily have been 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, depending on your perspective. But what I love, and Act actually brought this up here, Simpsons is not exactly a good showcasing of continuity, SA2K. Like, if that's your argument, I'm gonna have to ding you some points there. Consequently, I've actually felt that's one of the biggest weaknesses of Simpsons for decades at this point. I'm serious, by the way. I really do think that has been a huge flaw in Simpsons format since the aughts. But anyways, I love the bit where Celestia mentions how this day has, everyone else is big and happy, and this is the day when she remembers that she had to banish her sister. Now, I love that because it's actually a very rare insight that will be followed up on later, in fact, on just Celestia's personality, perspective, character. Because, as we'll see later, one of her biggest things is she has to put on the smile. She has to be the face. She has to wave, We've talked about this before, and this will come up in the future. She has to be that figurehead to make sure everyone feels like everything's safe and sound. And yeah, she has to smile while she is in fact sad. This is just a tiny little insight into that, but we get the idea that she has been, like, this has been a day of lamentation for her every year, and she just kind of smiles through it, and that is just such an interesting insight into her character, in my opinion. It also would explain why she likes the Summer Sun Festival so much now, because Luna's back. I would love for 1,000 years she did this. I would love the idea that on every Summer Sun Festival she reaches out and she's just like, Luna. And they just have a private little moment of happiness, to celebrate. Just something I like the idea of. But yeah, her crying behind closed doors, absolutely, 100%. So, we keep talking about the military on this show. And in my defense, I don't have an agenda here. It's just the show keeps bringing it up. That's my approach. I don't walk into any rumination for any show, whether it's Streamination or pre-recorded, with the idea that I'm going to talk about such and such. I write down stuff as they occur to me and as the episodes show them. With that preface, once again, we see that a proper military would be a really good thing to have in Equestria. Not for fighting purposes, but just for, structure. Because we see the Royal Guard, right? And they're like, oh, God, please. And they're incredibly, completely ineffectual. They have no idea how to deal with anything without an actual, they're basically panicking. And they have no idea what to do without a princess telling them what to do. Now, there's actually a lot to unpack in that relatively brief scene. So first of all, they have no hierarchy. Their hierarchy is the princesses and then everyone else. Now I'm going to spoil something for you, because that's not a hierarchy. That's terrible. That's an Emperor Palpatine approach. And spoiler alert, it doesn't actually work. It's one of the reasons the Galactic Empire was such a mess, was that so many people directly reported to him. I know that's not a one-to-one comparison. I don't want to call Equestria the Galactic Empire, but I mean you kind of get the thrust here. That doesn't work. And they all run to Twilight Sparkle, who, granted, they know her, and it's not like she's an unknown variable, but they don't come to her because she's Twilight. They come to her because she's an Alicorn. She's a princess, and therefore they can get their orders from her. Just what? Which leads me to the second thing. I actually tried to look up the term for this, and I couldn't remember it, but I've usually heard it referred to as absentee orders. Now, if you don't know what that means, absentee orders is basically if you no longer have a chain of command, if you can no longer access the chain of command above you, and an emergency happens, this is what you do. That's the concept of absentee orders. So, princesses disappear. Okay, we need to do this and this and this. It's the kind of thing that is normal even for non-military. In fact, to use a direct example, back in my IT security job, we had a bit of protocols that we would do on the off chance we couldn't get a hold of anybody. Like if something happens in the middle of the night, we had specific patterns of this is how we approach these things. And that was written down on paper, so, in case we screw something up for a customer, we can say, well, we couldn't get a hold of you, so this is what we did to cover our backs, So we, a dinky little IT company, had absentee orders, whereas the Royal Guard of Equestria doesn't. Unless the absentee orders is find the nearest princess, in which case I legitimately wonder if they would have run off to the Crystal Empire in order to... Right? Like, imagine if Twilight was just, a normal unicorn. Like, okay, what do? We must run to the Crystal Empire. I should be galloping to the Crystal Empire. Princess Amore Cadenza, whatever, please help us. Anyways. Now, someone, I think it was Weouds, mentioned the captain of the guard, of course, Shining Armor. I actually have a note about Shining Armor myself. I have a feeling he would have actually been useful here, since he seems to be at least competent. But no, they had nothing. So, and I agree with Sean, by the way. I think Twilight's mindset was, I need to give them order because maintaining the illusion of chain of command is important. Note how that ties on with Celestia's arc I mentioned earlier about maintaining appearances so that other people don't panic. You'll also notice that that's basically everyone else's response in this episode. Oh God, what's happening? What do we do? Turn to the princess, or turn to Twilight specifically. Even the main five are like, oh, thank goodness you're here. Now you can actually tell us what we need to do. You can tell us what's going on. Like, there's that sort of, I don't want to call it trust and authority, It's more like reliance on authority that is very common in this show, and is something that a lot of normal. I mean, we've talked about this. I kind of call it superhero syndrome, because a lot of the ponies just kind of look to their superheroes, whether it's the princesses or the main 5 or 6 or whatever, to deal with their problems for them. It's all over the place in this episode. So, neat little bit. There's a bit of a pseudo montage where we see how the curse, or whatever you want to call it, is screwing with the 3 different types of ponies. We see the vines and the little weeds, which which the earth ponies can't deal with. We see how the clouds have been infested and are basically fighting back against the Pegasi, and we see how the unicorns have their magic being on the fritz, and even have a different spell effect for it, and how it's just kind of screwing with their ability to cast. Second in command of the main 6? I gotta be honest, my first thought is actually Rainbow, but that's probably not true. Applejack, maybe? Of course, SA2K. Why would she live with her parents? Yeah, I'm gonna go with Applejack. I think I'll stick with that one. If nothing else, Applejack is used to being in charge and taking action quickly and efficiently, and capable of working with a group, which Rainbow has issues with. So I think I'm gonna go with AJ on that one. Anywho, so we see how it's screwing with all 3 of them, and Twilight has to fly there. Remember, kids, buckle up. They showcase the bit of the elements, and they showcase them putting them on, and there's a little special effect going on, all kinds of things like that. You'll also notice several of these scenes kind of quickly and not really effectively, but at least you get a bullet point of most of the side characters as well in this bit. Again, going back to that whole you could start the show here and still have at least an idea what's going on kind of a thing. So they use all the elements, and then it's like, yeah, poor Spike. I think he's going to be more and more of a butt monkey going on. I guess we'll have to find out as we go, but I've already felt bad for Spike up till now, So Discord shows up, and the episode immediately gets 20% cooler. Now, first he starts rapid firing being Discord, and it's awesome. I actually have more to say about Discord, and I will be saying more about Discord because he shows up 2 more times in the season after this. Not counting the next episode. But what I love about this is that he's not actually reformed yet, and it shows. Again, I'll talk more about this next episode, but he very carefully doesn't lie to them. He also, however, deceives constantly. You'll also notice 2 other little interesting tidbits. First, when they are about to re-petrify him, he's actually cringing, like, oh god, as if he, because that's this kind of thing that he can't do anything about, and obviously he doesn't want to go back to being stone. The other thing I found interesting, though, is there's this bit where he doesn't actually know how to deal with the situation. Like, he is legitimately asking for a lesson on friendship, which is also going to be a thing when she becomes the Princess of Friendship. We're not there yet. That's going to happen in Season 5. But he's basically asking for a lesson on friendship. We have reached an impasse. I don't know what to do. So how do we deal with things like this? I just find that kind of interesting, because in many ways, Discord understanding what friendship is and how interactions with other people are is going to be most of his character arc for the next 2 seasons. You'll also notice he is willing to help. The beginning of Reformed part I mentioned. It's just, he's only willing to help on his own terms. So he's still playing with him, and he's still messing around. And of course, he kind of hints at Sakura having an answer for what's going on here. Now, there was the bit where he doesn't remember Fluttershy's name. I like to think that that's legit, because this is pretty recently after he was reformed. Basically, let me put this in different terms. I like to think the tea parties haven't started yet. Let me put it that way. Now, those are going to start, and that's going to be a thing, and he will actually start to value Fluttershy. That will become predominantly clear in future episodes. But I think he's not there yet, and that makes sense to me. She's the first person who ever reached out to him. They're not buddy-buddy yet, right? And again, he's still trying to figure out this whole interactions with other people thing. And so SA2K mentioned something else I want to talk about briefly. You'll notice how quickly AJ, Rarity, and Rainbow were all like, we're going to turn you to stone. Oh, before, definitely act. Although that's just presumption. You know, we're going to turn you to stone. This kind of helps showcase the problem. As mentioned in the last episode, the only one who ever reached a hand out to him was Fluttershy. This helps to explain why he's not willing to just immediately reach out a hand to help them, because they're not willing to reach back. They're not his friends. This will actually be the point of a later episode in this season, and we'll talk about that when we get there. The only one who is his friend at all is Fluttershy, not the rest. Anywho, unfortunately, that's basically it for Discord in this episode. We'll talk more about him next episode, because he'd be a much more major character next episode. But Zecora shows up. First of all, it's always nice to see Zecora. But I can't let slide the fact that she just happens to have a potion. That she just happens to have already been brewed. That she happened to bring with her. That happens to respond only to alicorn magic. That happens to allow you to see the past. Yeah, I'm willing to swallow a lot of convenience, but that is a clear example of because plot. They were like, how do we move forward? In fact, I'll tell you exactly what happened here. I could almost see the structure of this episode. Because what happened is they were at the point where they were running out of time. You know, they had like 2 minutes left in the episode. So they had to do something to set up the next episode. And this leads me to my biggest complaint about this episode, because the episode ends on a gotcha. So she takes the potion, drinks, and oh my god, it's Nightmare Moon, it's Luna, who's totally talking to Twilight. Wink, wink. And as she's talking to Twilight, Twilight's like, no, don't turn into evil. And she's like, ah ha ha, I turn into evil. And now I'll kill everyone. And the episode clearly slants it as though, you know, this is the return of Nightmare Moon. Now, there are a few tidbits here and there that indicate that that's not what's going on. But the episode is just, I hate it. I hate it when episodes do that. Even in otherwise good episodes, I hate it when the episode's like, and then I'm dying. Doodle. To try the new taste of Funko's cake batter. I hate that crap. It's a complete fake out. You know? That being said, I noticed two things about Nightmare Moon's transformation, and you can't tell me this is an accident. So I've posited for years that Nightmare Moon and Luna are effectively different people. Now, this is easy for me to think because I analyze a lot of fiction, and there's a lot of fiction where you do something to someone, and the person that is then walking and talking is effectively a different person. We see this in Babylon 5, we see this in Warcraft, we see this in Star Trek, we see this in Lord of the Rings. There are many examples of someone where you do something to them, and they're effectively a completely separate person. So, two things I noticed this time around. Both of them are with the eyes. When she loses her cool and the moon starts kind of cursing out, her eyes go completely blank. Like, they actually bothered to render her eyes differently, so she looks like she's got this glassy, empty stare. Like she's, I don't know, empty. And then when she's reformed, there's actually a close-up of her eyes, and it shows the eyes actually changing into a more lizard-like format. I just thought I'd point that out, because it's an interesting little tidbit amongst all the other things going on. And this is the first time we've ever seen the transformation into Nightmare Moon. So. And of course, we know about the curse thing in the moon, and yada yada yada. That's from the comics, but I've mentioned it before. Either way, oh my god, Nightmare Moon's mech, to be continued.